much more than we have it here and now in the Western, so-called Western world. We have, on the one hand, especially in the East, the belt, where we have extreme riches and where we have extremely advanced technology. I had been teaching in China for a while, and students used the facilities, used what is called sharing economy, had been involved in digitalized processes to an extent that I was surprised. And why I say I want to go there is not least because you can see physically the contradiction. On the one hand, these devices are used. You have Uber, you have all these sharing economies, you have Airbnb, you have similar competitors in the country. And at the same time you have the Taiwanese Foxconn, where people are working under conditions that are pre-capitalist. I don't want to go into the political details. How is it possible that a company from Taiwan goes to China, does this, and socialism and whatsoever? We have had the new orientation on the 19th National Congress last week. This is not of interest. But what is of interest, I think, is this confrontation of two worlds, which we find here as well. Be it here in Russia or be it here in Moscow, be it in the European Union from where I come, in general, between the Mediterranean countries and the rich France, Germany, UK, still member of the EU, or be it within the countries. I'm currently living in Munich. I never ever saw so many homeless people sleeping rough across the city, in one of the cities that is considered to be one of the most wealthiest cities in Germany. So what is happening actually? One point that is happening, in my opinion, academically, is we are looking in the haystack for the large question, and then we are always finding needles. There's something wrong in the regulation of the financial markets. There's something wrong in the regulation of a company like Uber. There's something wrong in social law, social security, or in employment law. Without any doubt, these are very important questions. And these are very important questions, especially for those who are affected by the negative consequences. But at the same time, moving a little screw here and there doesn't really answer the fundamental questions that are going on. And I don't want to pretend that I have the final question or that I have even the final answer. But I want to point on some issues that I think are crucially important to bring them together and to think about them together. The one point is the dominance of today's discussions, especially when it comes to precarity, about technology. And this is, of course, an important point, but what we see as well is that many of these companies are actually not doing what they are supposed to do, or not only doing this, but they are doing many differences.
Но между ними большие различия.
I found a website from a Chinese company
Нашел сайт китайской компании
of this kind. It is actually linked to Foxconn.
Foxconn.
It's the head of Foxconn. I don't know the enterprise structures. Lofty aspirations, inclusion and diversity. This is the slogan. One of the most extreme exploiters in China, a Taiwanese company working for the world market, does. This is how they sell their image. Go to any of the workers at Foxconn and tell, this is where you are. They will not laugh, they will not cry. Possibly you know about the suicide rate in Foxconn. But we see more and more, especially in this area, the talk about corporate social responsibility, the talk about environmental responsibility, and. First point, this kind of contradiction we face of hugely profitable enterprises in the digital sector, information technology, selling themselves, presenting themselves, and investing quite a lot of money in sectors that are not belonging to it, including research, sometimes relatively advanced, progressive research. Point 2. There is a contradiction we don't really sufficiently think about. And I take the example because it's the easiest. Uber. The success story of Uber. It makes loss. If you look at the stock market, it's one of the highest valued enterprises with a loss. And it's not just a couple of rubles, it's millions. So what is this contradiction? And I heard yesterday, coming here from the airport, another major player in this economy, in this sector, Ryanair, low-fare airlines, has huge problems. And it is one of the enterprises that is relevant here because Uber does not employ pilots. It's a very complicated legal structure that they don't employ pilots. In the extreme case, don't worry about it, you're reasonably safe still. In the extreme case, it's Ryanair, but other airlines as well, where the co-pilot is not paid. But the co-pilot pays the enterprise because they have to make the hours to maintain their license. How is it possible that these highly profitable enterprises make still money, facing these huge problems in terms of structural capital building, in terms of accumulation? Next point, and I think they're coming to the sharing economy, and with this to a large market of this new precarious sector is a relatively recent development by the furniture producer, supplier, trades enterprise IKEA, Sweden. They buy TaskRabbit. And TaskRabbit is one of these sharing economies where you can offer your service and say, well, I can do a little bit craftswork there. I don't have a qualification, but I can build the I don't know, table or whatever you don't want. I can assemble this. Everybody can do it. So you don't need a qualification,
То
really.
есть вам действительно не нужна квалификация для того, чтобы...
But there we see the more or less traditional capital of producing furniture, selling furniture, now entering the sector of this highly, extremely precarious sharing, so-called sharing economy.
Так называемый шеринговый экономика включается.
And that the borders in legal terms, but as well in economic terms, are blurring another time, that the actual relevance of the enterprise, of the firm,
Это важно для производства, для компании.
doesn't exist anymore. You can apply for a new Nobel Prize because this was one of the Nobel Prizes.
Это был один
The
из Нобелевских премий.
consideration, what is the relevance of a firm, transaction cost and all this.
Понятие релевантность фильма, одна из Нобелевских премий была.
All these rules don't are not of the same relevance anymore in many of the sectors.
Да, уже не так, но реально фильм уже не так значимо во многих секторах.
Now, if we look at this,
Если мы это рассмотрим,
if we look at the new position of as well these Uber the drivers or the TaskRabbit workers, all the pilots at Ryanair and others,
нанимающих пилотов,
they are considered as entrepreneurs.
мы их можем использовать как для интерпретирования вот этой ситуации.
Schumpeter was talking about this,
Шумпетер говорит,
saying this is the inventive new power, energetic, looking for and finding some new field of investment.
который будет искать новые пути инвестирования, как раз вот они должны ориентироваться.
Now there is another thing,
Но есть и другой момент.
that many of the borders we are traditionally in economics, in political science, in sociology considering as the core issue are blurring as well.
Социология, экономики также важны.
Individual and social.
Индивидуальные и социальные, да, индивидуальные и
Where is the border between it?
где между ними границы теперь?
What is our position?
Какова наша позиция?
Private and public.
Личные и общественные.
What is the legal construction? We have had a valid legal construction of this is public, this is private.
Разделение, что личное, что общественное.
We don't have it anymore, and this means as well we don't define ourselves
Потому что мы сами определяем, что личное.
as being public worker, private worker, or private homemaker, or whatsoever.
Например, работая на дому, мы сами для себя решаем, что частное, что нет.
And very important is on an analytical level the blurring of cause and effect.
Да, последствия, эффектов, которые
Objectively, we find the situation of many people who do a job
которые действительно делают свою работу
in a precarious situation.
в прекаризационной ситуации. Они оказываются прекаризованными.
But what is the cause? Is it that they have to do it,
Но в чем причина? Они действительно должны это делать?
or is it that's the argument from the other side? Is it something that people want to do? They want to have flexibility, they want to have space for creativity and all this.
Пространство для творчества.
As well, when you look back at many of these technological developments, it had been and still is about the proper use of resources.
Они требуют правильного использования ресурсов.
And of course it is true that there are many resources wasted. It's about cars, it's about transport, it is about space, private space, accommodation, but as well in public buildings. The handling of things is the other thing. We are handling things, but the legal regulation of it is not clear.
Не очень ясно, как это регулировать юридически.
And subjectively, we know from many people they perceive the pressure under which they are not mainly as pressure, but as a kind of positive thing. Yeah, I have the flexibility, I have the freedom, I can work whenever I want. And at the end of the day, they work longer hours than anybody else. And in many cases, they say, yeah, I like it. I think what we have to consider is trying to get a clearer conceptual understanding where people are actually working and active. This is the core of it. We have this in our head, this imagination. We are working, we need money, we have to get income, and this is how we make a living. You find this in phrases of reconciliation of work and work-life balance, things like this. So we go to work, we stop living, and then we go back to life. What is it actually about when we talk about human activity? We can go back to Hannah Arendt's. We are locating ourselves, positioning ourselves in relation to nature, whatever this nature exactly is. We define ourselves as human beings, human existence, in terms of class and social strata, and in terms of technology. And I think this is what we have to consider as well, or more focused. Where do we actually, or how do we define in this relationship productivity? We have in economics, especially with Amartya Sen, this discussion on it's not about GDP, but there is more about it. We have to consider capabilities, we have to consider productive forces that are not part of this limited economic orientation. But it is about social values as well. Social values and social cost. I can't go into all the details of two approaches in particular I'm referring to. That's the French Théorie de Régulation, the French regulationist school, with Aguirre, Michel Aguirre, and the social quality approach. I redefined, if you want, the accumulation regime as a matter of how do we make money, or how do we produce what we need for our life, and how do we consume it. And then we have the regulation system that actually defines what is legal. And there is, of course, this discussion in different countries, very detailed discussion, how can we regulate an enterprise like Uber, Airbnb. In Hungary, Uber is not allowed, Airbnb is, I don't know why. In some cases there are very detailed restrictions. Of course, all is important, but we have to look at what is the overall regulation, what is considered as being allowed, being acceptable of making a living. And this making a living is for all. And then we find as well this question of extreme inequality, meaning what actually happens, and this is the interesting question, I think, what happens that we produce so much capital
когда мы производим так много капитала?
that we do not find any spheres anymore
Не находим никаких
to
сфер
invest it in a
для
profitable
того,
way.
чтобы это инвестировать для преимущества большинства.
So we find again and again some bubbles.
Все время вот эти вот огромные пузыри, которые лопаются.
As Keynes once said, I don't know exactly where, one bubble is okay, but as soon as it is a basin of bubbles, we have the problem that there is nothing left anymore. So the other thing is the social quality approach, that we all, as social beings, have of course certain references to something we need to exist. Most importantly, air. We should not forget it, especially under the condition where we have increasingly environmental problems. But it is about socio-economic security. It is about empowerment, meaning we have to be allowed to do something. It is about social cohesion. I mentioned Munich, where you have this huge amount in a rich city of people sleeping rough. And it is about social inclusion, meaning allowing people actually to do what they think is worthwhile. How can we locate in this context, really in this wider context, the question of precarity? Meaning, again, I think all these detailed questions are very important, but at the same time we have to look as well at the potentials that are technologically given, that are economically given. Another reference actually to Mills, to Marx and to Keynes. At some stage we will have so many products that we do not need to work anymore. Our needs and wants are satisfied if we work, in the traditional sense, 15 hours. That was Keynes' prediction, didn't work out. But I'm wondering, didn't it work out? I have had too much time in China, meaning I watched many stupid films, including on things I could not imagine, how people waste money. Having a collection, there was one, he was actually interesting. He said, I'm sick, I'm mentally sick. I'm collecting, I think it was Maserati. I'm collecting these cars. I have already 40. But not the normal one, but only special editions. And I say, no, you stop it. It's stupid. And then I see a new one, and I have to buy it. This person doesn't work. Other people work 60 hours. If you calculate this properly in a societal perspective, I'm wondering if we are not down to 15 hours for everybody. Let them work. What's the point of not working? What is the point of investing money in foundations to do good, after first exploiting what Microsoft does, after first exploiting people, that they need somebody who does good? Why not putting a proper law into place? Sorry. Of course it is a political question, but we have the economic foundations and we have to look at it. This is not a question of some people earn so much money, meaning deserve so much money. But it is a fundamental question of economic injustice. Emphasis, economic injustice. And there I come to an important point when we look at the new developments. There are
инновациях, развитии.
often used, I did it myself, I talked about New Princeton's refeudalization and things like this.
Да, много говорили об этом.
We have this development.
У нас было вот это развитие.
I have to be a little bit
Я, может быть,
careful and a little bit perhaps too provocative. We have a capitalism that is not capitalism in the classical sense anymore.
Мы имеем капитализм, который уже не капитализм в классическом смысле этого слова.
This was the concept of classical capitalism.
Была такой концепция,
You have a,
капитализма,
in inverted commas, fair exchange,
честный обмен.
where this was the characteristic of the laborer.
Было
The laborer is free, is not forced as the slave to work, is not owned by somebody,
Да, и что
but is
продавцы
free
не
to enter the contract.
Они свободные люди, да, сами выбирают.
Where is this today?
Где же это теперь?
If you look at the working conditions
Если
of
вы
people,
посмотрите на условия работы,
Yuba, TaskRabbit, whatsoever,
TaskRabbit,
and if you look at the working conditions of little Aldi, I don't know what, you have extremely harsh conditions there.
вы видите очень жесткие условия.
Marx was referring to accumulation by dispossession.
Маркс называл это аккумулированием без диспозиции.
And I think this is what we have to consider today. We have, of course, the classical accumulation of capital. You accumulate capital, you invest capital, reinvest capital, and keep the business going. Then you have the other point of accumulation by, what is it, what Harvey always says?
Как вы это обычно говорите?
Lost the term, doesn't matter. Where you have the occupation,
Если у тебя есть
the
дело,
violent acquisition of certain areas that had not been part of the capitalist process before.
Почему да, не было вопроса? Почему ты только не стал?
Child rearing is the typical thing where you have to pay now. Education is the typical thing where it is a business today where it's for sale. All these things and many others. Public services, it's not a public service anymore, but it is privatized for profit. The health service you need is sold, and if it's not worthwhile to sell it, you don't get it. And then you have the third dimension, which is accumulation by dispossession, meaning these workers working for little, working as pilots, they make it possible that we all get this cheap flight. They make it possible that we all get the cheap stuff to buy in these shops. I think this is the tension we have to think about when we talk about precarity in a wider sense. Notwithstanding the need of looking at the details, but I want to come to a close there with one remark which strikes me in a kind of way that I don't really know where to go with it. It links a little bit to what I said before, that a highly exploiting company like Foxconn presents itself as a superstar on the corporate social responsibility side. We have this extreme segmentation of society. And when there had been elections recently in Germany, I lived in Germany, and I saw not only by Aldi posters making the political choice or using the political choice as a choice of lifestyle for their products. There have been actually nice slogans. Thinking, yeah, actually, the choice I have as consumer is the same choice I have as voter in the political area. This is what we find again and again, this emphasis of something that is pretended,
делают вид, что
that could be there and could be relevant, freedom of choice for the worker, working in different areas at the same time, being creative, being prosumer, as it's called, but at the same time where it is actually appropriated and subsumed under this capitalist process. And I think this is something where we have to, what we have to consider in the different countries, but as well in a global perspective. And this is now really coming to the close that you have economically and that you have regionally and nationally these highly high wealth belts or centers, and you have globally the extreme still ongoing division between rich and poor. Meaning we are still dealing with very traditional questions of poverty, of social exclusion, and the distribution or injustice of distribution of resources.
Так, разрешить нашего коллегу поблагодарить за его такое обширное выступление с обзором, что творится в мире. Насчет расслоения населения, мне кажется, Россия уже все страны мира обогнала по этому показателю, и никаких подвижек в лучшую сторону пока что-то не просматривается. Но у меня вот такой вопрос, может, я не понял весь смысл перевода. Наш коллега весьма много времени проводит в Китае. Вот, а картину нарисовал так, что там многие заводы, в общем-то, мануфактура какого-то 19-го конца века, еще что-то это. И вопрос такой, за счет чего тогда Китай обеспечивает по 6% роста ВВП каждый год?
Well, I'm not member of the Chinese party, but we discussed this was the discussion we have had on the 19th Congress, which just closed. That it was, I think it was in 1972, the new orientation with Deng Xiaoping, to develop first a capitalist society in a very harsh way that allows then basically the old economic trick of a trickle down. If we have nationally wealth enough, we will at some stage be able to distribute it. This was, of course, not as simple as it sounds now. We have in China, on the one hand, with this strategy, a kind of general uplifting, but at the same time, a huge segmentation in terms of increasing inequality. Actually, when I arrived, I don't know how many years ago, in China, I thought, gosh, there are cars in the city, even in small cities with only about 10 million people. These are the dimensions there. There are cars, I wouldn't drive them in the countryside, much too large. But it's this show-off effect. This was extremely fast in historical terms. And it sounds a little bit funny. I always say I lived in a medium-sized city with 9 million people. That's medium-sized. That's the size of a country like Hungary, or twice as much as in Ireland or whatsoever. What is behind it, the development was and still is extremely fast. And this is the question now, where with the new orientation, and I don't want to go into political details here, I don't know enough about it, but where the orientation now is, or the reflection now is, this is what we did, and what he says, we did well, but we faced a problem of huge inequality and we have to address it now. Because otherwise we will run the entire country into mess. And this is what you saw over the last years, that you have there as well the development of bubbles. We have huge problems in steel industry, we have a huge problem on the housing or accommodation markets, speculation, and this is, I think, one can say without problems, where this is recognized and where they say now, I have a problem with it, we have to maintain the private market for accommodation, but where they say at the same time we have to limit speculation. And there are other bubbles as well, and it's a process of balancing and rebalancing.
Я еще в лоб в продолжение как бы задам
это в лоб
вопрос. Вот скажите, в России, не только в нашей стране, действует такую формулу используют, что Китай это большое количество, но неважное качество. Вот как вы, ну и может быть оценки какие-то экспертные знаете, которые как бы не поддерживают такую точку зрения.
But maybe China thinks otherwise. What are your opinion about this? About big numbers and not a good quality of China's production?
Well, I don't know if I completely understood the question, but one of the problems we have in China is that it's a huge country, like Russia. And we have the problem there that we have differentiated internal markets. We have the extremely rich east, south, and then we have other, where I would say these are other, not parts of the country, but these are other countries. So you find an internal export and import structure. And at the same time, you do not have the resources in the poor areas actually to engage in this modern industry. So in part, in consequence of it, is that we have a huge export orientation. Which is recognized, I think, I don't know if sufficiently, and I'm not the person who should judge about it, but where, and this is, I think, as well valuable to mention in such a context here, it's a general problem in all economies, not least when it comes to precarity, that we have the problems of an ongoing principle of nation states, the orientation on export-import, the international trade balance, but at the same time it is not working according to the classical principles anymore. So, and this is as well, I think, for us a challenge. We had been always talking about this. Was Ricardo right, or was it a right theory? I think today we can say for sure it is not anymore. If it ever was, it is not. But national policies work simply according to the old rules and don't recognize a change there.
Понятно.
Так, еще вопросы не возникли ни у кого?
Нет.
Скажите, пожалуйста, вот...
Так, Лен, микрофон включи, пожалуйста.
Да, чуть-чуть.
Кнопку нажми, загорится красное. И говори.
Вопрос такого характера. Известно, что китайская экономика основана
It is a common knowledge that Chinese economy is based on the stimulating consumption and not using the resources of technologies, but не технологии, а людей, то есть, да, вы имеете в виду?
И да, ресурсосберегающие технологии не
They don't resource-saving technologies and prefer using huge labor force. Is it still so? Все еще так? Вы вопрос спрашиваете, да?
Да.
Is it still so in China?
Это один такой подход.
It is one way.
Второй, который мы
The
можем видеть
about China,
северные страны Северной Америки, Европы, это наоборот исход зеленой экономики с точки зрения ресурсов, с точки трудовых и
Western economies try and do it this other way, more ecological technologies, and trying to make consumption not so huge.
призвав
Some borders by propaganda, not spend, not wasting resources of the earth, and this idea. How this two concepts, the contradictions in both. So two different ways, and in Western and in China there is a huge divide between people. How is it? Social granted. She talking about granted.
И существует мнение, опять же, что куда пойдет Китай, туда пойдет весь мир. Как вы считаете, за каким путем,
which way actually goes the world? Because
или ни один из этих путей не является
some opinions that where go China, go other world. So where really go? In Chinese way, or maybe Western ideas about basic income.
The last sentence?
Basic income.
Basic income.
Yes, maybe Western or China, which is actually, you say, suppose more possible.
Well, we still have in China a huge public sector.
У нас все еще в Китае очень большой общественный сектор.
And this public sector is the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises. And it is the state taking responsibility in many areas. And I think one important responsibility I see there, with all the problems, is that there is a state social responsibility and state environmental responsibility in terms of developing, at least now, a planning that considers a wider set with huge difficulties. If you imagine you have a medium-sized city of 9 million people, to put meeting points in, to have space till this is a huge challenge, but at least this is a consideration I saw there more than I would see in many Western countries, including the privately owned but state-controlled railway system. Now you have one huge advantage, I think, in such a country. Some people say it's a little bit brutal. They start many things from the scratch. Before I moved to China, I lived in Rome. If you get something done in Rome, a public thing, metro, building a metro is impossible, it's an additional line. You start digging, there is a stone, this could be ancient, we have to stop the project. In China they say we have to go from here to there, build. Which means that if you go by train, there's in many cases, definitely for me, no point in taking the flight from where I live, Changsha, to Shanghai. You take the train. It's not. It takes perhaps an hour longer, but it's more comfortable. You don't have all the security stress and all this. So in this way, there is this advantage of starting from the scratch. And now there is the tension, if you want. I think this is an important point in your question, that they start now to reorient the production. It was built, coming to your question as well, on the old idea, cheap labor, producing for the export market, doesn't matter how, but we are in business. I'm not friend of superlatives and all this and certain comparisons. I just read on the flight here, I'm not sure, in 2025 I think China wants to be the best in education, international education. Sorry for the university here, sorry for many others, but this is the ambition. They reorient. The robotization is now since 1 or 2 years a major issue. Fortunately, that a company like Foxconn is gone. And if you look at the conditions at Foxconn, they're horrible. And now the question is, linking to basic income, and I see a problem now, that today the Chinese policy is towards what is called liberalization, deregulation, just do it and do your business, find something. Without sufficient conditions in terms of social security, in terms of stability and whatsoever. In this way, it's a kind of contradictory process of, can we say, a refeudalization on a postmodern level or something. And this is, I think, a challenge the Chinese government is at least aware of. There is a challenge. What they are doing about it, I don't know. Of course, if you go to the documents from the party, from the National Congress, you see only beautiful things. I'm not convinced. I wrote actually yesterday or today something on my blog. There is this individualist orientation. There is in education as well a highly competitive orientation. I think it's wrong. It entails this orientation on find your own way, it doesn't matter. We don't look after you. The social security system has problems, let's say it in this way. There is nobody who has to starve, but at the same time I think there is not enough done for really a majority or large part of the population. And there is no consideration, as far as I am aware of, basic income, a proper, whatever it is, social security system that really covers not only emergency cases, but what is called dignity. There is, of course, then this kind of, and in this way, SOEs play a role of a state orientation towards corporate social responsibility. But this is a problem then with the rights-based approach. You don't have the rights to get basic income, but the company looks a little bit after you. Then if you go to Sweden, there a friend of mine, she was with 55 or something, was with is it Ericsson or Nokia, they couldn't employ her anymore. She said it doesn't matter, they have to look after me. They have to look for my lifetime. And they have to provide a job. This was her right. This is a different story. And to find a new system there, I think, is a challenge for all of us. And saying for all of us, it may mean today against the United States. Because they definitely don't do anything in terms of securing life.
Так, но я думаю, все-таки профессор Херман выдержал нагрузки русского профессора 1,5 часа продержать на лекции. Поэтому я думаю, мы поблагодарим еще раз. Пожелаем то, что...